She called me a burden at Christmas dinner, in front of my grandchildren, in my own house. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just set down my fork, folded my napkin, and looked at her. And something in me, something I'd been holding together for years, went very, very quiet. That was the moment I knew it was over. My name is not important. What I'm about to tell you happened over the course of about 4 years, though the seeds of it were planted long before that. I'm 67 years old. I spent my career as a civil engineer with the city of Edmonton, worked on infrastructure projects most people drive over without thinking about. I retired at 62 with a pension, some savings, and a house I'd paid off on my own after my wife passed in 2018. Her name was Lorraine. She was the kind of woman who kept a spare key under a fake rock, even though she knew everyone knew about fake rocks. She trusted people. I think I inherited that from her after she was gone. My son. I'll call him my son the way you call something yours when you've poured your life into it. His name is Adrian. He was 34 when this started. Smart kid. Always was. Got into the University of Alberta engineering program, which made me proud beyond words, though he switched to business after second year. I paid for all of it. Never once asked him to contribute. That was my choice, and I own it. Adrian met his wife. I'll call her by her role because that's all she ever really was to me in the end. He met his wife during his last year of university. She came from money. Old Alberta oil money, the kind that's been sitting in trust funds long enough to develop its own personality. Her family had a lake house near Sylvan Lake. They drove matching SUVs. Her mother once told me at a dinner I was invited to, but made to feel I was attending on sufferance, that she thought Edmonton was a bit rough around the edges. I smiled and said I'd spent 30 years making it less rough, which did not land the way I intended. The wedding was at a venue in Banff. My contribution was $42,000. I wrote the check without blinking. Lorraine would have wanted me to be generous. I told myself that every time the number felt large. After the wedding, Adrian and his wife moved into a condominium in Oliver, a nice neighborhood, walkable close to the river valley. They had 2 children in quick succession, a boy, then a girl. I was a good grandfather. I drove over on Saturdays. I fixed things that broke. I took the boy to Oilers games when I could still get decent seats before prices went completely sideways. I thought we were building something, a family, the kind that holds. I should have paid closer attention to the small things. The first thing I noticed was the way she spoke to him when she thought I couldn't hear. Not loud. That's what made it effective. It was quiet, precise, the kind of correction you'd give a child in a grocery store when you don't want a scene. Adrian, that's not the right way to say it. Adrian, you don't need to tell him that. Adrian, your father doesn't need to know about our finances. He'd come back into the room slightly smaller than when he'd left. I told myself it was nothing. Couples have their own language. Who was I to read into it? The second thing I noticed was the drift. It started maybe 18 months after the wedding. Saturdays became every other Saturday. Every other Saturday became holidays and birthdays. Phone calls went to voicemail and came back as texts. Short ones. Fine. Good. Busy week. I started driving past their building sometimes, not to stop, just to reassure myself it was still there. But I hadn't imagined the whole relationship. I am not a man who talks about loneliness easily. I will tell you that the 2 years after Lorraine died were the hardest of my life, and that the thing that kept me functional was the idea that I still had a role, a reason to be present. I shoveled my driveway and went to work and showed up at Adrian's on Saturdays because those were the mechanisms that kept me upright. When the Saturdays started disappearing, I didn't know what to replace them with. I want to be precise about what happened next because the order matters. 2 years before the Christmas dinner, Adrian came to me about money. Not a small amount. He and his wife had found a property, a duplex in the Glenora neighborhood. Older building. Good bones, they said. They wanted to renovate it, rent the upper unit, use it as an investment property. The price was significant. They needed a co-signer on the mortgage because his wife's trust fund was structured in a way that made it inaccessible for this kind of purchase. Some condition in the original arrangement, or so they said, and Adrian's income alone wasn't enough to satisfy the lender. I co-signed. I also contributed $60,000 of my own savings toward the renovation costs. We drew up an informal agreement, I'll call it that I would be repaid over 5 years of no interest. Adrian wrote it out himself. We both signed it. I kept a copy in a folder in my filing cabinet next to the house insurance documents. What I did not do, and what I should have done, was have a lawyer review it in Canada. And I want to be clear about this because it matters. An informal agreement like the one we had is not unenforceable, but it is enormously difficult to act on without significant documentation, and what we had was 2 signatures on a piece of paper with no witness and no notarization. I did not know that then. I learned it later, the hard way. For about a year, things were better. The renovation went ahead. The upper unit got rented. Adrian and I talked more. He seemed lighter. His wife was civil to me in a way she hadn't been before, which I mistook for warmth. Then Lorraine's sister passed and left me her estate. It wasn't a fortune, but it was substantial. A house in St. Albert that sold for $420,000. Some investments. In total, I came into roughly $580,000 over a period of about 8 months, which is the pace at which estates move in Alberta. I made the mistake of telling Adrian. I don't know exactly what changed after that, but I know that it changed. His wife started calling me more. Always pleasant. Asking about my health, my plans, whether I'd thought about downsizing. Did I really need a house that size, just one person? She'd read an article about seniors and home maintenance. She'd send it to me. Very informative. She was only thinking of me. Adrian started raising the topic of a family trust, not aggressively at first, just floating it. His wife's family had one, as I'd been told many times. It was the smart way to manage generational wealth, he said. Protected from probate. Keep it in the family. He had a financial advisor he wanted me to meet. The advisor was a friend of his wife's father. I went to one meeting. The structure they proposed would have put the principal assets, my house, the inheritance, into a trust of which I would be a beneficiary, but not the sole trustee. The other trustees would include Adrian and his wife. When I asked what would happen if the trustees disagreed about a distribution, there was a pause that lasted slightly too long. I went home and I thought about it for 3 weeks. Then I called my own lawyer, a woman I'd used for the house purchase back in 1991, now in her 70s herself, semi-retired but sharp. I described the structure. She said, and I'm paraphrasing, that I would essentially be handing control of my assets to people whose interests might not align with mine at a time in my life when I'd be least equipped to fight to get them back. She was not emotional about it. She just laid it out. I called Adrian and told him I wouldn't be moving forward with the trust. He was quiet on the phone. Then he said he'd talk to me about it later. He never did directly, but things changed again. The distance returned, this time with an edge to it. When I came over, his wife was busy. The kids were tired, or napping, or had activities. One Sunday I arrived for a dinner I'd been explicitly invited to, and the house was empty. I sat in my car in front of their building for about 20 minutes before I drove home. I told myself I must have gotten the date wrong. I checked my phone 3 times. I had not gotten the date wrong. I want to tell you about a phone call I had with my sister, who lives in Kelowna, about 2 months before Christmas. She asked me how Adrian was. I said fine, I thought. She was quiet. Then she said, gently, the way you say something you've been waiting for permission to say, that she'd been concerned about something she'd noticed over the past year. The way he spoke about me to other family members. Some of the comments his wife had made at a cousin's birthday. The word she used was positioning. Like they were positioning me as declining. Fragile. A problem to be managed. I drove home from the phone call, and I sat at the kitchen table. The same table Lorraine and I had bought at a place on White Avenue 30 years ago, and I thought about every small moment I'd explained away. Every cancelled Saturday. Every voicemail. Every "we're just so busy." Every comment about my house and my health and my plans. I thought, I know what this is. Christmas dinner was at my house that year. I'd offered partly because I missed them, partly because I thought the neutral ground of my own kitchen might soften things. I cooked for 2 days. A proper roast, the red cabbage Lorraine used to make, the butter tarts the grandchildren liked. I set the table the way she would have. I wanted it to feel like something worth keeping. His wife arrived in a mood I recognized but couldn't name, a kind of restless dissatisfaction. She made a comment about the kitchen being dated, which it is, I haven't renovated since 2009, and then a comment about the drive, and then nothing much for about 40 minutes, just the sound of the children and the television. Adrian was quieter than usual, the way he gets when he's waiting for something. It happened over the dishes. I was telling a story about a project I'd worked on in the 90s, a bridge expansion north of the city. No one was listening particularly closely, which is fine. It wasn't a riveting story. But his wife interrupted me, not rudely, just flatly, and said that maybe I should think about whether I still had the capacity to manage a house this size on my own, that she looked into some independent living options that would free up the equity which would be beneficial for everyone, given the family's needs. I stopped talking. I looked at Adrian. He looked at the table. And then she said that at this stage of my life, I needed to be realistic. That I'd been, and she used this word, a burden, on their planning, on their future, on the conversation she and Adrian needed to have about what came next. The children were in the next room. I stood up. I didn't shout. I said very quietly that I had one question. I asked Adrian if he agreed with what she'd just said. He didn't answer for a long time. Then he said, "Dad, she has a point." I nodded. I picked up my plate. I carried it to the kitchen. I stood at the sink for a moment, looking out at the backyard, at the cedar hedge I'd planted the year the kids were born, and I thought, this is the last Christmas I will spend trying to hold something together that has already been let go. I did not call him on Boxing Day. I did not call him in January. He called me once, in the second week of January, and I answered. He said he hoped I wasn't upset. I said I wasn't. I said I wasn't. I said I was thinking very clearly. He seemed to find that reassuring, which told me he hadn't understood it. In February, I called my lawyer again. I told her about the duplex, about the informal agreement, about the co-signed mortgage. She pulled everything, reviewed it, and we talked for 90 minutes. The co-signing was the significant issue. I was a guarantor on a mortgage for a property I had no legal ownership stake in. If they defaulted, I was on the hook. If I wanted out, I would need to be released from the guarantee, which required either Adrian refinancing without me or the property being sold. I wrote Adrian a letter, a proper one, on paper, not an email. I laid out the financial arrangement clearly. I said that I needed to be removed from the mortgage guarantee within 60 days, and that I was formally requesting repayment of the $60,000 as per our agreement. I had my lawyer sign off on the letter. He received it by registered mail on a Thursday. He called me the following Tuesday. He was upset in the controlled way he gets, the way his mother never was. She went hot. He goes cold and precise. He said this was unnecessary. He said I was making things difficult. He said his wife was very hurt. I said I didn't doubt that. He said, "You're doing this to punish us." I said, "I'm doing this because I should have done it 2 years ago, and I didn't, because I wanted to believe this was something other than what it was." He hung up. His wife called me the next morning. I let it go to voicemail. The message was 11 minutes long. I listened to it once in my car, parked outside the YMCA where I'd started swimming on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. It covered a lot of ground. My character. My failure as a father-in-law, the trauma Adrian had experienced from my coldness throughout his life, which was news to me. The way my rigidity was going to affect the grandchildren's relationship with me. At the end, she said she hoped I would reconsider and that she was willing to have a conversation. I did not reconsider. What happened over the next 3 months was mostly paperwork. Adrian had the duplex refinanced through a different lender, which removed me from the guarantee. That was completed in April. The $60,000 came back in 2 tranches, $30,000 in March, $30,000 in May, which Adrian sent by e-transfer with no note. I confirmed receipt each time by text. 2 words, received, thanks. That was the extent of our communication for most of that spring. In June, I sold my house. Not because of them. Or not only. I'd been thinking about it since before Christmas, since before the trust conversation, maybe since the first winter after Lorraine died, when I spent 3 days not talking to anyone and didn't notice until the fourth. The house was 4 bedrooms. I was one person. Lorraine's presence in it had been thinning for years, replaced slowly by empty rooms and the particular quiet of a space that no longer has a reason to be the size it is. I sold it to a young family, a couple, teachers, a toddler, another on the way. They came to the showing and the woman walked through every room with the particular concentration of someone planning a future in each one. I watched her from the kitchen doorway. I thought of Lorraine. The sale closed in August. I had already arranged where I was going. I have a friend, a man I worked with for 15 years, good engineer, better fisherman, who retired to the Comox Valley on Vancouver Island several years ago. We'd talked for years about the possibility. He and his wife had extra space. I came out in the spring to visit and stayed 2 weeks and felt something in my chest unknot that I hadn't known was knotted. I moved in September. I rented a small place in Courtenay, walking distance to the water. The mountains are visible on clear days. I joined a curling club, which I hadn't done since my 30s. I started sleeping better. Adrian found out about the house sale in August when the listing went public. He called. I answered. He asked why I hadn't told him. I said that the house was mine, had always been mine, and that I'd made a decision about it. He asked where I was going. I said I was moving west. He asked if I was running away. I said I was walking towards something, which was different. He asked if he could have the kitchen table, Lorraine's table, the one from White Avenue. He said the kids would love it. They'd grown up sitting at it. It had sentimental value. I said I was taking the table. I have it here now. It's by the window. On clear mornings the mountains are visible, and the light comes in at an angle that makes the old wood look the way it did 30 years ago when we first brought it home. I eat breakfast there every day. His wife sent me an email in October, long, articulate, outlining everything she felt I owed them. The emotional debt. The relational debt. The way I had destabilized their family by withdrawing without warning. She CC'd. Adrian. I read it once and then moved it to a folder I labeled simply No. I have not been back to Edmonton. I talk to my grandchildren on video call every second Sunday. Their parents allow this, which I appreciate because they could make it harder and haven't. The boy asked me recently if I had a dog yet. I said not yet. He seemed to find this a significant failing and told me in detail about the kind of dog I should get. It was the best conversation I'd had in months. I am 67 years old. I have a pension, a rented apartment with a view of the mountains on clear days, a kitchen table that still smells faintly of 30 years of meals and arguing and laughing and all the ordinary catastrophes of a life being built. I swim twice a week. I curl badly but with enthusiasm. I gave my son more than I should have, for longer than I should have, because I confused generosity with connection and hoped that one could produce the other. It cannot. You cannot buy belonging, and you cannot sustain it through silence. What I know now, sitting at this table in the morning light, is that leaving is not the same as losing. I did not lose my son. I stopped pretending to have him. That is a different thing entirely.